Hi again, everyone. Now it's back time for me to come back again with a new video, and this time I will feature the layout generator. It will be a kind of a go through all these kind of semi-hidden features that I wish that someone had made a video or explained in detail to me when I started mapping. So the layout generator device doesn't have any properties. When you double click it, you just end up inside the layout view when you see things from the top. And for this demonstration, I'm going to use that very basic file that I used with the that has the lowlands and the highlands, and I'm only going to use the highlands for this example. So we're going to look at the features of the layout generator because they can be kind of hard to find, and a lot of them are very useful, and you will need them, so to speak, in order to do a terrain that has a lot of the natural variations and stuff that your work will demand sooner or later. So let's dig into it. I'll double click on it and I end up here in the layout view, and there you have a tab you have an overview tab where you can move around the area you're working on, and you can introduce other extents and stuff like that. But then you have a new tab for each layout generator, and I'm going to use my TR2 Highlands for this example. And the first thing is that there are a number of different shapes. You can click on this and just create a box like this, and you see now I get highlands peeking out of my ocean here at basically forming a square, or I can form a circle or whatever. Yeah, and these are, and you can right click them and delete them, but I'm going to first take a look at the most complex one, and that's the polygon one. And the polygon is simply you click on it over here, and then you get that little, looks like an envelope or something, and you can just left click and create nodes in whatever shape you want. So let's do like this, and then I right click when I'm done, and that gives me terrain that looks almost like any shape possible, so to speak. So this I can just create an oddly formed piece of highlands, and then I can right click on the shape itself, and one of the there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. I will go into the edit shape properties later, but one of the first things you can do, you can disable the shape, and that means that the shape is still here but it doesn't have an effect, and that is great if you have a whole bunch of stuff and you want to see what is causing the error. Then you can disable a certain one of the shapes, and then you can enable it again. The same thing with lock shape, because then you can lock it down, and because otherwise it might be tricky when you have a terrain with lots of different shapes. You can lock the ones you're not working on, which it's a great feature to have. And you can also delete, and of course you can delete shape. The bring to front and send to back doesn't have any effect on the terrain itself. It's just a way of easily getting to edit the ones you need to get to, because sometimes it get crowded. And then you have rotate shape, scale shape, and translate shape. The translate shape I haven't really figured out what it's doing, so if someone can tell me that, I will be very, very happy if someone can shape me. But the rotate shape is as simple as that. You just click it, and then you can start rotating it. And the problem is that it's kind of difficult to assess it or to adjust it properly. So I rarely use it. I just delete it and make a new shape. So, but it's there if you want to. And then you click again outside. So it doesn't have any. It's difficult to figure out how it works, but it's there for you to use it. The scale works the same way. You do this, and then you just click and drag outside, and you can scale up and down the feature. This one is something I can kind of really like, especially if you want to do simple continent maps or something. You can draw the continent within the picture, and then you can just scale it up to whatever size you want it. So that's something that can be really useful. And then you have another one that is very useful, and that's the use brazier path, or I'm sorry if my pronunciation is not that perfect, but you can, but using that you get these, if you look at each node you get like a small square, and that means that you can, oh, sometimes it's difficult to get it to, yeah, here we are. So you can drag these out, and that way you can create rounded bits. Instead of these harsh corners, you can create rounded shapes. And you can also make them turn in on itself. And this can be really useful because it creates small valleys and nooks and outcroppings and things like that. And the same thing when you see these straight features. Here you have one of these typical World Machine straight ones. Sometimes you can get rid of them if you work like this, but it depends a bit on the settings, and we get into them later. So by using this you can kind of conceal a lot of these kind of just straight angled segments on a shape. And once you have the basics, you can go into the 3D view, and here we have our terrain. So we created a few features here, and now it's just sticking up like this out of the ocean, and that's where we can go in and look at some of the other features down the line. But let's go back in here, and now I need to look at my notes again here. This is the basics for the polygon, but there is another of these shape libraries or shapes that is kind of has a number of features above, or that are special, that none of the other shape so the line is special. It has some special features. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to create a line. And a line like this has some kind of interesting and cool features. First of all, if I drag this out and I get to the node itself like this, that means that I can right click on it and enter precise value. And then this is 8,000 meters, which is the maximum. They always create it at the maximum level. So if I go down and let's say I change this to 2,000 meters, then the whole thing goes down. But then I can go to the other end, because the first time you enter something, all the other nodes will get the same adjustment, which is a bit weird. But then you can go in here, and you can either right click, and you have to make sure you hit the node so it's blinking before, and then you can take precise value, and then I put this back up to 8,000. And now I have a mountain chain that is, I'm going to move it into the center here a bit. And now I have a mountain chain that is going from low hills gradually up to the highest peak in this end. And this is something that can be highly useful. For some reason, that to set the actual height of each node doesn't seem to work on any other shape except lines. So that's why mountain chains can be really cool to use lines that way, because you can make peaks sticking out, and you can create these soft hills going from nothing to maximum. And then there's the other thing, is that you can also add and subtract these things. So you can click on one of these, and then you can subdivide a vertex. That means that you can add nodes, so then that way you can create long mountain chains. And you can also do the other way around, saying that I don't need this node, so you can delete that vertex, which is very useful. And there's also an advanced feature that I rarely use. If you right click not on the nodes, but you right click on the line, you can edit the so-called Lofting Curve. And here you can manually go in and edit each of these nodes along the path. And if you for some reason, if you use the layout generator for rivers, that might be that's the only time I really used it. Otherwise, it's been enough for my purposes to simply edit each of the nodes. But here you can go in and you can drag the line here, and it's going from 0 meters to 32 kilometers, and that's basically the stretch of the line here. And then I can accept it, and this way, if we look at it now, we've actually created a little bit of a peak here and then goes down, and then it gently, steadily climbs up that way. So this is the nodes, and well, there's one more function of the nodes, is that you can actually weld nodes together. And for that, I'm going to put my lines over here, and I'm going to create a polygon again. And here you can take one node and you can gradually get it closer to another one, and you can bind them together. And this is useful sometimes if you want to have, especially if you use the layout generator for things like roads, rivers, and things that you want to be continuous. That way you can connect one to the other, and then you can right click on it and you can enter precise value and enter the same value for the two different shapes. So if you have two different lines, you can connect one to the other and set the same height, which is very useful for roads, for instance. It's perfect that way. Or rivers, not so much useful really for mountains, but especially for roads and features that going across the landscape, and you don't want one to, you want them both to connect to the same spot, and you want them to be the same elevation. And then you can right click again and you can break the vertex welds, and they will be separate again, and then you can just take one of them and drag them over, and then you can't really be sure which one you grab, so you have to check it that way, and then you can separate them again. There is also a way you can right click and hold the mouse button down, and then you get this quick way of setting the elevation of that point. And now I'm doing it on a polygon like this, and it doesn't seem, I've never got any effect of it. So to set the individual value for one of the vertices seems to only work for lines and not for any of the other shapes. Okay, now the next thing I want to show you and we're going to look at here is breakup. And breakup is this feature you find up here, and you can simply click breakup, and all of a sudden the all shapes using the same layout generator, that's one of the things, all of them are now affected by breakup. And this is what makes it simply starts adding a lot of random noise or chaos into the layout, which is great because all of a sudden I have all these cliffs going in and out, and I kind of break up those simple, even a square or circle with some breakup looks perfectly natural. So that's breakup is a feature that you will find very, very, very useful to create natural landscape. And the breakup, there's a small edit button here, and you can edit the breakup. And the first one is kind of fractal breakup. It's simply how harsh the fractal is, and you can tweak it up and down, but normally I just leave this one for at 1, so to speak. And then you have another feature that is very, very important, and that's the breakup scale. Is this a layout that you use for continental to make, like, mark out where a continent is? Then you might want to have a breakup scale that is in many, many kilometers. But if you're trying to just put a hilly area that is a kilometer across, you want to have detailed work or a road or a river or something, then I usually bring this way down to 0 meters, or 0 meters kind of defeats the purpose because then the breakup kind of disappears. But 300 meters, maybe 600 meters, maybe up to a kilometer. But I usually go down to 300 meters. But for this example, I'm going to use 1 kilometer. And roughness, that's basically how much of the breakup should actually be visible. And if I crank this up to maximum and do this, then it will be, I will create lots of and the terrain kind of twists so much that you get a lot of weird things. Look at the mountains over here. You get these small kind of peaks sticking out as islands around, which is one of the coolest features to use breakup for. Coastlines. It's perfect to create interesting coastlines, meaning no breakup, long stretches of smooth beaches, lots of breakups. You get these kind of ragged or rugged coastlines with lots of small islands, cliffs, and all sorts of features. And then when we move into the brush properties, that's a way you can actually control how much of the breakup should be visible on this line, for instance, versus this polygon here. So you set a general breakup for the whole layout generator, and then you can simply say how much of that breakup should be visible for each path. So let's move into the shape properties brush. And I don't understand the word brush here, because this is basically, you click on that little button and this little window comes out. And here I can set the properties. If we start with this polygon here that is now selected, you have first the general elevation, and this slider, if you bring it down, the terrain, if you look at the preview up at left here, will go down gently. So if I set it down to roughly somewhere like this, this becomes just a little island sticking up with some low hills. And this way I can create or control the general elevation of it. Then I can stack another line or smaller polygon for the really high mountain peaks in what area I'm working on. So this is the general elevation of it. Then you have the opacity strength. It's not so much useful when the layout, it basically just works the same way as elevation when it comes to the if the layout generator is controlling the fractal or something that generates terrain. But you might also want it when you come into textures and stuff, then the opacity becomes more appropriate, because that way you can control how much of the texture should shine through when you have different blend modes and stuff. But it basically works as another elevation when you control terrain. And then comes fall off distance. This is really important, and that means how much should the effect be blurred out. Now it's set to 4 kilometers. That's the standard. So every time you create a new shape, it will automatically get 4 kilometers at fall off. And if I reduce the fall off here, I will get less and less of that smooth transition to the coastlines here. It will be here. Now I created harsh, sharp cliffs that just go straight down into the ocean. And the opposite, I can increase the fallout. Now it's 900 meters. If I increase it to something like 10 kilometers, I get very smooth coastlines like this. So fall off is a very important feature. Then you have the effect of a shape. And the normal effect is plus, meaning it adds to the terrain. But you can also create, if I create a circle on top of here, this one, and I click like this and I create negative, that means that this circle becomes like pink, I guess is the color, and it actually cuts away from the terrain. So, and if I do this, then I can just reduce the fall from this, and I could create this. Perfect for craters, for more exact shapes. So here I can actually, if I use the combination here, so if I take the polygon again and I increase the fall off on the polygon, but I keep the fall off 0 on the circle here, that means that now I created a varied coastline with smooth beach-like coastlines on most of it, and this part here has very harsh cliffs, and it's also deep. So this is like a meteor impact or some geological features that makes the ocean deep and really harsh, sharp coastline in this little part here. So this way you can blend different effects together using shapes that are negative and shapes that are positive. And the next feature here is the fall off type. And to demonstrate this the easiest, I will right click on the circle and delete that shape because I don't need it for the moment. And then I have this, and now the fall off normally is going on the outside of the shape. But sometimes you want to have more kind of a precise mountain. You want an area that have the highest peaks in the middle, and then it gently slopes out over towards the surrounding terrain. And you want to make sure that the mountains are within this exact area. Then you can actually change it so the fall off is on the inside of the shape. And if you create that, at first when I click that, it disappears completely, but that's because the fall off is actually larger than the area, the polygon. So if I reduce the fall off here to 3 kilometers, to now it's starting to you're starting to see it here. And here I now created an island sticking up gently, but now I still have very sharp features here. But so what I do is I can increase the altitude a bit, and I can increase the fall. You see, it's kind of difficult when I have this small of a thing, but I make it a little bit bigger. And in order to make this work, you need the next interesting thing, and that's the fall off profile curve. And you can make the fallout different. You have a standard curve, meaning it just goes from 100% and then gradually smooths out. But you can also create the opposite. You can have a curve that looks like this, or you can have a curve that looks like this. And now if I use this curve and have it the fall off on the inside, all of a sudden it can start looking really kind of cool this way. And here I have something that's starting to be useful. I should probably increase the fall off just a little bit. And here we have something that I think could work really well. And it's all within that perfect spot. So to use the fall off on the inside is often very useful if you have a guide map that you want to follow, meaning your map needs to match a previous map. And then that means that you can just take this and shape this around the island and then add fall off until you get the coastlines roughly right, so to speak. And now comes the interesting part, where you can actually, how much breakup am I going to use? And using the breakup participation down here, oh, sorry, excuse me, you can actually use you can set the individual. Now it's set to 100%, meaning it should use the same breakup as the mountain chain over here, or as the line shape uses over here. But you can also reduce this, and you can reduce it down to 50%. Now you see that the coastlines are starting to smooth out more and more, and you can also reduce it down to 0. And when we look at the island now, you can see we have an island that is way more smooth, and you have smooth beaches and not so much more. So this way you can also create how rugged do you want the coastlines or the outline of the hills to be, or how smooth should they integrate with the rest of the landscape. So it's a very, very useful feature. So this one, it's fantastic. And the same thing with the curve. You can also change how much of that's basically blending the curve back and forth. I'm not really sure exactly how this works, so to speak. So you have to kind of play with this one a little bit. The edit here means that you can set a curve that is, so you can kind of create something that are like this and then accept. And you see you can get very weird results. So you get like a smooth here up, and then this can be to manually edited curves that way can be really interesting for things like the Grand Canyon and stuff when you have. So I'm going to change this to outside, and now we can look at it and see there should be kind of a distinct line down here, but it might not be so visible in this case. So let's see if we can go like this and this and accept. Yeah, you can play with it, and you get these, you can change the general characteristics, especially good for huge continents, and if you want to have distinct valleys like canyons and stuff that has the same type of look or feel along the whole canyon, and that should stand out from the other landscapes. So you can make one area that uses one of the shapes distinct from the other ones. You can go in and edit that one. But and yeah, so that's the one of the features that I use it for. And then I can rake up the breakup participation until 200%, and you get lots of islands, and you get a shape that is completely wild and going overboard, which might be nice for fjords or really chaotic badlands with lots of weird mountains everywhere, or a coastline that is dotted with, if you want to make archipelagos and stuff like that, it can be really useful. And then there's one more feature I want, or two more features, sorry. The first one I want to show is the shape list. And this is great. You can actually name each of the shapes here, like lines 4 or whatever. And that means that you can find them using clicking here. And in this small of an example, it's not really useful. But if you work on a continent where you have hundreds of shapes, and for especially for things like roads and stuff, you can give them names that you can actually find them. And that way you can delete them or edit them as you see, so that see fit as needed. And so the layout shape hierarchies and the shape list is actually really useful at times. And there is also a hidden little file button here, and that means that you can actually add, you can create the layout as a vector thing in Illustrator or something like that and import it. Or you can add, you can save, you can export these to a separate file and then import it into. Perfect if you have a continent that are it looks like this, so you can reuse shapes. And I have never really used it, but I guess for some other uses it might be very, very useful. But I haven't used it, but it's a possibility. You can actually shape them, you can import them and export them. So that's what I wanted to show. That's the kind of the features that I would love someone to told me, that took me weeks and months to kind of go over these features. So play around with them, and you will be able to create a lot more nuanced and varied terrain that you would normally, it will be much harder to do in fractal, so to speak. So this combined with the fractal kind of setup for terrains, that way you can create natural variation over large areas that is simply fantastic. Thank you so much for watching.